Police officers have read it. What's the dumbest call you've ever had to respond to? Not an officer, but I picked up a few during a couple of police internships. Besides chasing a pig, the mystery goo was probably the single dumbest call I can remember. The officer I was with got called to deal with a family issue involving a minor and some healthcare type stuff, so I stayed in the car listening to the radio. With things like that, it was sometimes better that I gave the family some privacy. There were 3 other officers on that day. One was being trained by the field training officer, so they rode together. The other had his own car. Anyway, I'm still listening to music and a call comes out. If any of you recognize this, I forgot the numbers or exactly what was said. The call was along the lines of, 323, City Dispatch, can you head to address? Caller is advising there is a brown goo in his alley. Silence. Ksh, dispatch, 323, brown goo? Ksh, 10-4, he says it smells bad. Ksh, alright. I'm still in the car waiting for my officer to get back because I want to see what this mystery goo is. More voices on the radio. Ksh, dispatch 323, I'm 1023, on scene. There's definitely brown goo. It definitely smells bad. And more voices. Ksh, dispatch 316 and 324 are going to be out at address investigating that goo as well. The FTO had brought his trainee along. My officer hurries back to the car and we decide we need to also investigate this goo. We get to the address and pull into the alleyway. Now the entire city's police force is sitting in this tiny alleyway talking to the homeowner/caller. In the grass between the gravel of the alleyway and the back of the caller's garage is this foamy brown goo. It was baking in the summer sun, and it smelled like a combination of roadkill and a ham and cheese sandwich that had been left sitting in a hot car for about a week. We all stood around making jokes for a while before a sheriff's deputy joined the fun. I poked the goo with a stick, which didn't do much more than release more bad smells. The caller had a rake, which only spread the goo around further. The FTO got this dumb smile on his face and said, "You know, this seems more like a fire department issue." He got on his radio. Ksh, dispatch, can you start fire to our location for the goo? 316. Dispatch, 10-4. A few seconds later, we hear a fire page. Series of tones unique to each department in the county go out over the radio, and we start laughing. In about 3 minutes, 2 firefighters show up in basically a big Ford F-350 with some rescue gear on it. They get out, demand to know why we called them in, and then also start poking at the goo. They start to smile. "You know," one of them says, "we don't have any water on this truck." The other firefighter starts laughing, and the first picks up his radio. "Start an engine to address." They back their truck out of the alley. Finally, the engine shows up with 4 firefighters on board and the lights flashing. The driver actually pulls this giant truck into the narrow alleyway and drives up to where we were gathered around the goo. They get out and walk up to us. "Why are we here?" Officer points to goo. First 2 firefighters laugh. "What is it?" "We don't know." "God damn, it smells bad." Yes, it does." The firefighters sit for a moment in silence. "We could hose it down, maybe?" We tell them that they 100% should hose down this goo. The homeowner/caller agrees. The firefighters unload a hose and attach it to the front of the engine. They tell us to stand back and then blast the ever-loving crap out of this rancid mystery goo. They send goo and gravel alike flying into this poor man's yard, coating his garage with it. Now everyone but the firefighter manning the hose is laughing, even the homeowner. As the firefighters packed up their hose, we decided there was no more protecting and or serving to do, so we headed back for our cars. As we were leaving, one of the officers turned to the homeowner and said, "Remember, this is the fire department's fault," and everyone laughed again. This all took maybe 25 minutes at most. Such are the joys of small-town policing. Small town. That makes more sense. I was like, how are you getting away with calling every emergency service possible to this goo? Surely there are better things to do. For a small-town force, maybe not. Hopefully not. Story 2. Here are a few. Dispatch to domestic violence. Quote, "My oldest son is assaulting my youngest son. Arrive on scene. Parties are 8 and 6. Mother insists, quote, he got to go, as in the 8-year-old had to go to jail for slapping his younger brother. Both brothers went to CPS, and a safety plan was put into place to ensure the mother was capable of raising them. Dispatched to theft. Someone is stealing my tomatoes off the tomato plant. Looked in backyard. Noticed tops of hostas also missing. Case closed. Warrant signed on Bambi, Prince of the Forest. From a few weeks ago on a very busy Saturday evening, a guy called in a car blocking the driveway of his house. Parking complaint is a very low priority run and is being held while we attend to car crashes, bar fights, burglar alarms, and the like. Guy keeps calling and keeps being told police are occupied with priority runs. Guy calls back. was robbed at gunpoint waiting for police. We respond. He doesn't want a report taken, can't give description, but, hey, while you're here, can you tow this car blocking my driveway? We do. He doesn't realize business across the street has video surveillance. Charged with disrupting public services a week later after video reviewed. Several reports of burglaries in progress that turned out to be raccoons, they at least addressed the part, and several burglaries where the burglar put all belongings outside in black plastic bags. These often had several notices of eviction from the sheriff's department. People think by not showing up to the eviction hearing, they can't get evicted somehow. Story 3. Ex-cop. Had an alcoholic walk into a parked vehicle, fall over, blame the driver, verbally abuse him, and asked for CSI to prove it when we turned up. The driver had just turned on his engine to back out of his driveway, and the guy basically heard the noise, bear in mind he was paralytic, and just sort of followed the noise until he blindly walked into it. He had no mark on his leg where he claimed to have been hit, no dent on the vehicle, not even a mark or any evidence whatsoever. It was a large car, and any force would have caused at least a notable mark if it was in motion. Oh, and most importantly, the vehicle hadn't actually moved at all out of the driveway. Ended up telling the alcoholic to go away because he was basically an idiot. He tried kicking off at us and almost got himself arrested. And another one I just remembered. It wasn't me responding to it, but it was quite funny to listen to. I worked for a somewhat rural force in England, so sometimes it did get a bit quiet and not much would really happen. Anyway, one extremely lazy Sunday, the only thing over the radio for most of my shift were updates on a fallen tree in the road from a traffic officer. Yeah, I've pulled up to the tree, it's blocking the road. Yeah, still sat here with the tree. No calls yet. I think I see the council turning up to get rid of it. Yeah, scratch that. It was just a taxi. Do we know how long they'll be? I've been here for ages now. Yeah, they're definitely here now to get rid of it. It went on for hours, and it was hilarious. Before anyone says anything in the comments, the accent was abhorrent. There, I said it for you. Moving on. Story 4. As a cop, I get asked frequently about the most blank call I've ever taken. What's the scariest, the creepiest, the weirdest, the funniest, or the stupidest call I've ever taken? Over my 11-year career with an additional 3 as a crime scene tech, I've seen a lot. When you think you've seen it all, you come into work the next day and get surprised again. Because of that, I usually have to pause for a while to try and remember what specific story I think they would want to hear. When it comes to stupid calls, the list is extensive. There's the mother who called because her 6- and 8-year-old sons were fighting over Pokemon cards. There's the lady who called to report feral cats in her home, which turned out to be 2 kittens, less than a month old. There's the guy who called to report that the ducks in the pond behind his home were snoring and keeping him awake. Admittedly, that was my top winner for a long time. But I feel like early last year, a new winner arose to accept the Stupidest Call I've Ever Been to award. The call, which was initially reported by a third party, came out as a disorder in a parking lot. 2 men were outside of their vehicles arguing with each other. Then, while I was on my way, one of the involved parties called and said that a person was blocking him in. That's not too uncommon. Many people make many bad decisions. I think blocking someone in is pretty high up there on the bad decision scale, but I've seen it. Someone takes your parking space, which really brings up the argument what makes a parking space yours, and they block them in. Did someone cut you off, tailgate you, merge into your lane, or do any other traffic movement that led to you feeling offended? Follow them until they park and block them in. Baby mama drama? Why not argue loudly outside and block her in so she can't leave before you have a chance to fully express how upset you are? Boss didn't pay you on time? Block his car in with yours until he pays you. It's sure to work. But see, what people don't realize is 2 things. The person being blocked in isn't really blocked in because they could get out of their car and walk away. In fact, the aforementioned boss exited his car, went into his office, and called the police to report that he was being detained and kidnapped. The other thing that people frequently forget is that there are millions of guns in the US, a vast amount of them in my state alone. The worst thing you can do to someone who is already emotional and angry is to corner them. It's much wiser to park elsewhere, note the plate, and call the police. Or evaluate the situation in your head. Decide whether it's really worth your time, effort, and frustration because they merged in front of you. Or maybe, just maybe, you could head home to your family, have a glass of wine, and watch the Modern Family Marathon. But back to my call. As I'm driving, I'm speculating on the possible options I could be facing on my arrival. I pull into the parking lot. It's a grocery store parking lot with an L-shaped strip mall of the anchor store and numerous smaller businesses on each side, along with a gas station on the corner, a freestanding auto parts store, and a chain restaurant that serves pancakes of the international variety. The parking lot is sizable, with lanes adjacent to parking stalls, along along with the access roads that run through the lot to allow ingress and egress. Fairly close to the center of the lot, I see them, a Corvette and a lifted pickup truck. It's basically a T-shaped intersection in the parking lot. The wider road, I use the term because I don't know what the drivey parts of the parking lots are called, is running north-south from the public roadway to the front of the storefronts. The smaller road tees off of that to the west, and eastbound cars have a stop sign. Now, understand that traffic law doesn't exist on private property, at least in my state or any state I've ever heard of. The only thing we enforce are DUI, reckless driving, or hit and run. That's it. Stop signs on private lots are merely suggestions. The Corvette is on the east-west roadway, facing east about 15 feet back from the stop sign. The truck is primarily on the north-south roadway in the midst of a right turn on the east-west. My first assumption is that it was a private property collision, and the drivers both got upset and started arguing, but as I exit my patrol car, I see neither vehicle seems to have damage. I contact the first driver of the truck. He tells me that he's headed toward the grocery store. He starts to turn right toward the parking area, and his truck is so large and the roadway so small that in order to negotiate the turn, he takes up both lanes of traffic of the roadway he's turning onto. As he's turning, the driver of the Corvette comes up from the west and refuses to yield while he finishes his turn. He stops in the eastbound lane and refuses to back up. I clarify, there was no collision. I talk to the driver of the Corvette. He tells me that he's trying to leave the lot. He's driving eastbound through the parking lot toward the larger road that takes him to the exit. As he approaches the stop sign, the driver of the truck comes whipping around the corner and into his lane. The driver of the truck refuses to yield to him and refuses to back up. I clarify once again, there was no collision. In speaking to them further, I learned this hadn't just occurred either. The traffic snafu occurred, and initially, both the drivers remained in their cars, trying to win the Mexican standoff. Approximately 10 minutes later, yeah, you heard that right, the wife of the truck driver gets bored and exits the truck to enter the grocery store. Give or take 10 minutes after that, both the drivers exit and begin to argue with each other over who needs to back up and who needs to yield to the other. At that point, someone called the police, and it took me just over 5 minutes to get there. So, here we are, playing Billy Goat's Gruff for nearly 30 minutes, and to top it off, neither vehicle was blocked in. Either driver could have reversed out of the situation and gone on their way. But that's not how you win a dong measuring contest, now is it? Upon realizing that the only crime that was being committed was both of these guys could possibly reproduce, I did the following. I clarified no crime was being committed. I pointed out that the situation was so ridiculous that even one guy's wife wanted out of it. I told them both that I've met kindergartners with more maturity, and that they deserved every minute of wasted time they were spending here, but I wouldn't be a part of it. I suggested that they should find a way to reverse, unless they were too childish to understand how cars worked. Then I turned and laughed out loud all the way back to my patrol car. I left and got Starbucks. To this day, I can't fathom 2 middle-aged men stopped in a parking lot for half an hour because each one felt they had a perceived right-of-way that doesn't even exist. Story 5. Obligatory not a cop. When I was a journalist, I was sent to the home of a woman and her disabled son. The woman said someone had stolen their van, which her wheelchair-bound boy depended on to get him to school, as well as his physical therapy and other medical appointments. This is the kind of story local news outlets drool over. So I'm gathered there with a few of my colleagues at this woman's hastily organized press conference. Also in attendance were several neighbors to show support, a bunch of cops who had been assigned to the case, and the district's watch commander, who I think knew the family. This was well below the kind of event that would require his presence, so someone must have pulled the strings to get him there. Anyway, we're all gathered in her backyard, and she's in the middle of a tearful statement about how important the van is to her son. Behind her, the sliding patio door of her house opens, and a concerned-looking man steps outside. He looks at the wife and says something in his native language. She answers, he answers back, and her face goes pale. One of the neighbors starts laughing, and we all look at him. He says, he asks what's going on. She said the son's van was stolen, and he said, no, I took it to the store to get groceries and stopped by my mother's for a visit. And sure enough, the van was safely parked in front of the street. As it turns out, the father never drove the van unless he was out with the son. He had taken it that day to fill it with gas, unbeknownst to his wife. I was able to turn it into a story about false calls to the cops. Story 6. 911 operator here. Call came in as a possible domestic. Male running down the street in the middle of the night behind a female, both screaming and yelling. Second caller comes in, advises that they have no shoes, and the man is screaming, "Ah, I can't believe this is happening to me." Very atypical verbiage for a domestic. Normally, you'd expect something more along the lines of, "Screw you, you female dog, I'll murder you," but sure, okay, we should still go. The police arrive on scene shortly after, then update with very monotone voices that everything is fine, cancel the ambulance, cancel extra cars, etc. Won't explain further. They are audibly trying not to laugh and only mostly succeeding. Hours later in the office, they explained that the couple had woken up from a supposedly dead sober sleep, spotted a dark presence on their back deck, and ran outside into the night shoeless and screaming. That one made our Twitter feed. Story 7. Not an officer, but my brother had an incident. I will start this off by mentioning that my brother is autistic, functioning, but I don't think he can ever live on his own. Especially after this. He was picking out a snack in the aisle when the cashier decided he looked creepy, so she called the police, telling my brother that she was doing so. So he was terrified and ran. As he ran out the door, he knocked over the Slurpee cup covers. The cops ended up finding him outside and went inside to question the cashier. It took a while to get from her what he actually did, as she was laughing and cracking jokes. The cops were not amused. We were watching all of this on the body cam footage. All she could come up with was that the lids were knocked over. They asked if she wanted to press charges, and she said yes. So thanks to a cashier that thought he looked creepy, my autistic brother is going through court proceedings, and it's costing a ton of money and stress. I mean, I realize being a gas station clerk can be scary, but my brother did nothing. From the body cam footage, they did not seem pleased with going through all of this for a, quote, creepy-looking autistic kid. Story 8. Not a cop, but worked at a convenience store frequented by cops. We gave them free coffee. We were out in the middle of nowhere. Think of it as an insurance policy, especially for third shift. Third shift. It was dead that night. Coworker and I noticed a car in our parking lot under the light. The only one that was working that week because someone crashed into the other one. 2 people in it. Car was backed into the spot. Driver and passenger were clearly watching the store but never came in. They'd been there for at least 20 minutes. We get nervous and call the non-emergency line for the cops. They say they'll send a squad car over. Cop takes a few minutes to show up, and about 20 seconds before he does, another car pulls up next to the other one, and the two start trading something through the windows. Cop sees this, blocks them in, flicks the lights. Another cop comes by too. They investigate. The driver of the first car was an employee of the store who apparently was also a dealer and chose to arrange a deal, 1, where he worked, 2, where cops were known to frequent, and 3, where we were trained to call the cops for suspicious activity. We even had a few local cops' cell numbers on the phone sheet behind the counter. Not to mention sitting for 20 minutes looking incredibly suspicious under the only light. Cops later said it was the dumbest freaking thing I'd ever seen. Story 9. I used to be a cop. I got a call to an upper-middle-class neighborhood for a trespassing complaint. When I arrived on scene, I spoke with the, quote, victim, a 50-something white male who coincidentally was an elementary school principal. He informed me that his neighbor trespassed onto his property countless times, and he demanded that I arrest the perp. When I questioned him about the perp, he informed me it was a 3-year-old neighbor child who was the trespasser. I was obviously taken aback that he was so adamant that I, quote, arrest and punish to the fullest extent of the law a 3-year-old for the crime of trespassing. I told him there was nothing that could be done criminally or civilly to a 3-year-old that was playing in his yard and accidentally stepped over an invisible line in the grass, and I was gonna leave. He filed a formal complaint on me with the department for dereliction of duty. My chief and the town mayor both told me to forget it. Story 10. When I was a little kid, my dad called the police on a man with a gun outside of our house. We lived in the middle of nowhere, Georgia, and he was off deployment. Navy, if anyone's curious. It was pretty late, so the sun had died down and it was pitch black. My dad went into the kitchen and took his glasses off to clean them. Very important, my dad is nearly blind. He looked outside the kitchen window towards the neighbor's house and saw the shadow of a man with a shotgun standing in front of his barn. Instead of assessing the situation for a moment or putting his glasses on to verify, he immediately calls the 911 and proceeds to tell them about the mystery shotgun man at the neighbor's house. They pull up and he sees them walk around to the back of the barn, turn around and go into the neighbor's house, and come back outside. He sees them handcuff the man and they proceed to walk towards our house instead of the cars. At this point, he puts his glasses on and goes to the door. The police knock and he opens the door with the biggest crap-eating grin I've ever seen in my life. In a split second, it changed from happy to sad to confused to annoyed, back to confused, as he stares at 2 officers and a scarecrow in handcuffs. The officers had quickly discovered the man was a scarecrow, went to the neighbor's house, explained the situation, and asked if they could borrow it for a moment. The only words from the officers were, "No need to worry anymore, sir. This man's going away for a long time." Story 11. Probably will get buried, but Obligatory, not a cop, but. My oldest daughter is very strong-willed. My oldest stepson is classic Asperger's, so we asked him to go get her at the bus stop. She was in 1st grade at the time. We tell him that if her little friend C asks if she can come over, she can, but otherwise bring her home, and I go to take a nap. I wake up to my husband saying, "Thank you, officer." I go to the living room to find that apparently daughter wasn't invited over to C's house and had a full-blown tantrum. Stepson, being the practical guy he is, tosses her over his shoulder and brings her home, kicking and screaming, completely oblivious to the concerned neighbor filming it all. The cops had been combing the neighborhood looking for my kids. Officer gets to my door. Younger stepson answers. Cop says, "Have you seen these 2?" and shows him phone. Without missing a beat, the younger says, "It's for you," and walks away. Older stepson freezes, doesn't know what to do or say. Cue husband to the rescue. Daughter gets a lecture. Police officer leaves, laughing and shaking his head. This is the 2nd time that year that the police came looking for my daughter, the suspected kidnap victim. Thankfully, she hasn't done anything to get attention again. Yeah, fair enough from the neighbor, to be honest. Definitely something that you would stop and look and be like, should I tell someone? Story 12. I wasn't a cop, but I was an EMT for about 8 years in a decent-sized city with a penchant for violent crime. We got a call for a guy that had been assaulted with a hammer. Apparently, a local rambunctious 12-year-old threw it at him and hit him on the toe before scampering off down an alley. My partner had recently found out I can do a pretty mean Christopher Walken. He bet me $20 I couldn't do the entire call in his voice, radio traffic included. I looked him dead in the eye, picked up the mic, and gave him my answer. Medic 14 en route. Partner loses it. I had to wait for him to step out of the cab before calling the arrival so it didn't sound like he just plain lost his mind. 14 a dispatch. We're here at the scene. Dispatch, clearly confused. Yeah, on the scene at 1837. I had to give my partner a minute to compose himself before going inside. Once he was ready, in we went. Now, overall, the guy had no reason to call an ambulance for this. He didn't have a mark on him, no discoloration or deformity or bleeding. He even said his toe doesn't hurt, but there we were. So I had no problem going full walking on him. "So, I hear your toe hurts. Got hit with a hammer. A miscreant, no doubt. Threw it at your foot. Bang! Right on the pinky toe. It's a shame." Partner buries his face in the med bag, pretending to look for something. By now, the patient knows something is up, but he has no idea what. He keeps looking at my partner, who is having a bad time of keeping even a remotely straight face. Then, he comes back to me, completely deadpan. "They'll catch him, I'm sure, this degenerate, soon. In the meantime, my man, what do we do about your toe? Surely surgery is unlikely." Patient with an unsure smile on his face. I dunno, man. You said surgery? You think they're gonna cut on it?" Partner sounds like he's dry heaving into the bag now, refusing to make eye contact with me or even look in the direction of the unfolding mess. Patient looks at him, then back at me, puzzled. "You misunderstand, my good man. You see, I don't think it's an option for you. There's nothing to be done. No bruise, no marks, no broken bones. There's no need for medical attention, as it were. You're fine." Yeah, man, that's cool. I was just checking to see, Better safe than sorry, I get it, I do. But I think you'll be okay here at home. An ice pack might help if you want, but you don't have to. Yeah, all right then. I just get some ice on it. So in short order, he signs a refusal and we get back to the rig. Partner is wiping tears from his eyes, red in the face, still getting the occasional chuckle rippling through him. He says it's the best $20 he's ever spent. "Dispatch 14, patient, refuse transport, we're in service." With the sound of my partner no longer able to keep it in and laughing quite out loud. Dispatcher didn't get what was going on, but our supervisor did. 14, meet me at your quarters." Oh, crap. We arrive and he's already there. I get out looking as guilty as can be. Partner can't do it. Never even steps out of the ambulance. Oh, hey, Super's name. What's up? He stares at me through his driver's side window with a look somewhere between amusement and vague disappointment. Don't do that anymore. And tell that idiot to step out of the truck if he can't keep from laughing. And with that, he just drives off. That was the first and last ride of Christopher Walken EMT. Okay, I gotta be honest, I don't really know what Christopher Walken sounds or talks like. I've heard like small bits, I think. Before voicing this, I had looked up a couple interviews. I don't know. I don't think I got the full effect of the story. But hey, I tried my best. Story 13. Not a police officer, but I am an EMT. My dumbest would have to be the 19-year-old who believed there was an entire shrimp stuck in her throat. Before I begin, let me say this woman had no history of mental illness, no obvious cognitive deficits, and appeared to be unimpaired by drugs or alcohol. We're dispatched to a local walk-in clinic for choking. Arrive to find our patient not only walking out to meet us, but talking too, meaning her airway was unobstructed. We get the story from her. She was eating some shrimp for dinner the night before, and one maybe scratched the back of her throat. In her mind, the only possible conclusion was this scratchy feeling must be an entire shrimp stuck in her throat. When asked to describe the feeling, all she could offer up was, "It's stuck between the bones," and "If you do an x-ray on me here, you can see it." When informed by my partner after much convincing that we could not, in fact, perform an x-ray inside of the ambulance and remove said shrimp, she settled on a ride out to the hospital to have one done. But not just any hospital. This woman insisted we bypass 3 closer, more appropriate facilities for the trauma center. My partner and I agreed, having just come from there and knowing they were absolutely slammed that morning and most likely out of beds. We transport, arrive, and are sent to triage post-haste. All the while, Miss Imaginary Shrimp complains and moans about having come to the ER via ambulance, yet still getting stuck in the waiting room with a minimum 3-hour wait time. Story 14. I went to a disturbance in a house once. The guy I was working with and I get there, and there are 2 old women in the front room. We didn't get any answer, so we just walked in. The one who lives there greets me as Peter. I tell her I'm not Peter, but she insists. She says, "Yes, you are, Peter. I want this female dog out of my house, Peter," gesturing at the other woman, who I think was named Alice. Alice is this little, short, fat old woman, as wide as she is tall. She's drunk and she just starts chuckling and telling me to screw off, saying she's not leaving and she'll fight me if I try and make her. The householder at this point starts ranting, shouting Peter at me over and over again, demanding I get her out of the house. For some reason, all the abuse and demands are coming my way, and the guy I'm working with, who was my tutor, I was pretty new to the job, is just standing by the door, creasing up at this. There's a noise from upstairs, and quite quickly my tutor cop decides to extricate himself from this bickering based on that. He winks at me and tells me to have fun as he leaves. This whole time the ranting is going on, and I'm trying to form some sort of diplomatic basis to defuse this bullcrap, because the last thing I want to do is arrest some old drunk. Through this, I've managed to establish Alice lives across the road, and I'm trying to reason with her to just go home. I hear a banging from upstairs, so I run up expecting to see my tutor fighting someone. As I get up, I see him speaking with some guy who's about 6'3" and has the build of the honey monster with thick milk bottle bottom glasses. "Hey man, what are you doing in my house?" This is Raymond. My tutor calmly tells him we're there because of the women downstairs. Raymond replies something like, "That pair of female dogs has nothing to do with me. All I do is watch police camera action on my video all day every day." Sure enough, this was on in the background. By this point, I'm shaking my head in bemusement and starting to laugh. My tutor gives me a knowing look and we go back downstairs. We're getting Alice out and getting on with our lives, or so we thought. We walk back into the room and I'm greeted with, "Peter, there you are. Get this female dog out." I've composed myself now. I tell her straight up, I'm not Peter. That's Peter, and point at my tutor. "Oh, so he is," she responds, and she starts shouting at him, calling him Peter over and over, and I'm cracking up now. We're just about to take hold of Alice to remove her, and suddenly, Raymond bursts into the room, squares right up to my tutor, faces 6 inches away. He reaches into his pocket and brings out a bag of sweets. "Hey man, do you want a frickin' humbug?" Both of us just start laughing out loud at this totally absurd interaction. Alice pipes up at this juncture.
"Raymond, I only came over here to sit on your face again."
Our amusement turns to horror in an instant. Raymond tells the room to screw off and heads back upstairs.
"Peter, Peter, Peter!"
starts over and over, screaming at the top of her voice. This is enough. We grab Alice, each taking an arm, and start to remove her from the house. She is remarkably strong for her age, laughing as she struggles with us. We get to the front door and she says she needs the toilet. I tell her to wait till she gets across the street to her house. She is not going. She's adamant. She starts holding the front door shut, and like something out of a 40s slapstick film, I'm swatting her arms away to open the door. I finally get the door open, and then Alice braces herself in the doorway. At this point, everything just stops. She stops struggling, and we stop trying to force her out the door, because we realize her trousers have just fallen down, and she's not wearing any underwear. I guess for the ease of sitting on Raymond's face. There's a long pause as my tutor and I look at each other. This is interrupted by Alice. She begins maniacally laughing and proceeds to start peeing. It splashes all over the floor and her trousers. She laughs harder and leans back. Her urine is arcing out the open front. As this is happening, the woman with a no name begins ranting and punching me in the back. They weren't powerful blows. I'm absolutely powerless by this stage. Both me and my tutor are crying with laughter. The nameless one is shouting upstairs,
Raymond, she's peeing.
We hear Raymond at the top of the stairs say, "Oh, you dirty female dog, all over my laminate floor." This makes it worse. I'm trying to stop from soiling myself with laughter, and the other woman is still hitting me, and I don't give a crap. My tutor is likewise. Alice continues for an unnatural amount of time. I manage to push the other woman into the living room and shut the door on her. We are still crying with laughter, but we compose ourselves enough to try and shut the front door. Alice won't let us. She's well braced now. She was also still arcing out the door. As I look up, I see two bystanders walking past in horror. I'm mentally picturing what they can see. Two cops fighting a fat woman who is peeing out a door. This doesn't help me. Shut the freaking door, I'm saying in desperation. Finally, as Alice's flow subsides, so does her strength, and we get the door shut. It took us a couple of minutes to calm down and negotiate her into pulling her trousers up and take her across the road. Her son opens the door. She is calling us bastards the whole way and just staggers in. He gives us a knowing look. I felt sorry for him. He had user written all over him, and I think I know why, having met his mother. At a guess, I think he saw the arcs of pee from across the road. We walk away, job done. The door opens behind us, and all I hear is Alice in the sweetest old lady voice,
I love you, boys.
Followed by more maniacal laughter. We hear her son dragging her back inside. Neither of us chanced looking back. We drove away, stopped the car just down the road, and began laughing again. Whole thing was bizarre. Story 15. I'm going to throw a curveball here. Not the dumbest call they responded to, but their dumbest response to a call. I work in a homeless shelter. I probably call or speak to police at least every other week over various issues. Often we have them called out for assaults or other violent behavior, and it can take anywhere from 5 minutes to over 4 hours depending on what mood they're in, I guess. If it's staff or we don't have control, they're pretty fast, but otherwise they take an hour or two. So we get a lot of neighborhood complaints being in a residential area. And as such, an agreement my managers made with the other locals is that if there is a significant disturbance on the street, I, the night support, ring in to report it on a non-emergency police number. So if we get complaints, we can cite the report and wash our hands of any blame. I called maybe the second night after I got this update. Non-emergency number, told them who I was, and that there was a lot of noise, some sort of shouting. I couldn't see who it was or what was going on, but it was about 1:30 a.m. and a Thursday night. In 4 minutes, I had 4 squad cars and a police van, total 9 officers, all outside my building, all responding to, hey, there's some shouting over here. No urgency, nothing massive or violent, just a generic shouting at a stupid hour. I've never had such impressive response times again, sadly. Story 16. Some cop out there is probably thinking mine/my landlord's calls. My landlord called the police all the damn time over the dumbest crap you could imagine. I left my straightener on one time, and it shut off not long after I left for work. And she called the police for that. There was garbage in the parking lot. Oh, she called the police. She would present the call as a more serious issue like, my ex-boyfriend, he's stalking me and he left garbage outside. I think it was him. Or, there's a potential fire going on in my apartment upstairs and no one is home. She would embellish what she was calling about just to get the attention of the cops. Then they would show up and go, you called about a bag of garbage? She only knew this because she was entering our apartment when we were working, and every single time the cop would explain to her, she can't just go into the apartment. She would argue all the time and say, but it's my unit, I own it, and they're so young. How do I know they won't set the place on fire? I'm just doing inspections. When she told the cop she's feeling very unstable having us as tenants, he told her, ma'am, I don't think you have ever been stable. Edit. I just remembered this. One of her tenants was handicapped, so naturally she used the handicapped space in front of the building. Someone had a visitor who parked in the handicapped spot, and my landlord saw a car parked there with a handicapped sticker that was not her tenant. And guess what she did? Yeah, called the police. One day she began a campaign of locking out all the tenants and then called the police on us, and the cop basically told her to screw off. When I finally had enough of her crap, I told her I'm breaking my lease and I better get my deposit back. I had a camera in my room and I caught her going through my things. I left work, went to the police station, and explained my situation. They knew who she was and the cop had to help me move my stuff. I took her to court and won. Story 17. Kinda fits the theme here. A coworker and his wife adopted a Chinese baby, beautiful little girl, sharp as a whip. One day she accidentally calls a 911, panics, and hangs up. The operator calls back and the kid, now 6 or 7, answers, being right next to the phone. Operator asks if everything is okay. Pretty quickly realizes it's a child and asks to speak to a parent. This is where things take a turn. Little girl says something like,
Mommy's dead and Daddy's downstairs sleeping.
Instant alarms. Police dispatched immediately, along with an ambulance and rescue squad. Operator is afraid of a murder, self-unaliving having happened, and the little girl might be in danger. The first officers on scene enter the house to find my coworker startled and confused on the couch, having just been awoken from a much-needed nap after working a late night. They ask about the mom, to which my coworker says something like, she's dead. Tensions escalate further until he explains she died about a year and a half prior of cancer. Little girl confirms the story. Yes, mommy is dead. She has been for some time now, and the confusion is quickly cleared. Officers and first responders leave, and my coworker cannot possibly get back to sleep. Oh, I thought this kid was just panicking and said something. They were telling 100% the truth, just in a way that might cause confusion, particularly to the police. The police were probably relieved, but your coworker probably freaked out a bit, especially after saying that his wife was dead to the police, who thought he may have ended his wife. Story 18. Not an officer, but a dispatcher. Got a call from someone out of state at about 7 a.m. saying that her friend and her husband were FaceTiming the caller, and they were being beaten by a stranger in their home. Multiple officers are responding, lights and sirens, and when about 6 or 7 officers arrive outside the house, they break inside, only to find out the friend or her husband were not being assaulted. They had brought home a stranger from a bar the night before, and the stranger was banging with the husband and wife. They were all drunk, so it took several minutes to figure out what was going on. The friend had FaceTimed the out-of-state caller to kind of show off how dirty they were being. The stranger didn't like that, so he got really upset and arguing started. But the out-of-state caller didn't know what was going on, so she assumed they were being robbed or beaten. The stranger was getting drunk and kind of violent and ended up getting tased. No one was arrested, but the husband was so embarrassed about being a cuckold in front of about a dozen other men at this point that he refused to speak. It took way longer than it needed to figure out what was going on. I can understand being embarrassed at this point, but also, you got officers in your home, just tell them the truth. You may never have to interact with them again. Just say what happened so you can all go your separate ways. Hopefully not him and his wife, though. Story 19. I was a police aide for my community college a few years ago, so basically dorm security, and I'm the one who called the situation in. One night, a group of students decided to overcrowd our elevator and thought it would be funny to jump and get it stuck at roughly 1 in the morning. So I radio in the situation to the officer on duty. The officer on duty lets out this exasperated sigh and was like, God damn it. All right, I'll be there in a few minutes. He gets to my desk in the foyer of the dorm building, and I catch him up on the situation and show him the security footage of the elevator. He radios the local fire department to come get it unstuck, and tells them that it's stuck because of their own stupidity and it's a non-emergency. So, they take about a good hour getting to us. All the while, the students walking around the dorm eventually all gather in the lobby to watch the live security footage of the interior of the elevator. Basically, everyone who wasn't stuck in that elevator was in the lobby watching the feed. As an aside, 3 of the girls stuck in the elevator took their tops off because it was getting stuffy in the elevator, so everyone in the building got a free show. They tried to complain about this later, but it wasn't against the rules for others to watch my security feed, so my hands were clean. Cut to when the fire department gets here and they're all freed. They are promptly chewed out by the officer on duty. They were all reprimanded and had to pay damages to the elevator. Story 20. UK police officer. This was about 8 years ago on a night shift at about 2 a.m., so I actually had some time on my hands. I went into the RAD's office and looked through the 999 calls that we wouldn't be sending someone to. I saw one from a man reporting a ghost in his house that was throwing objects around his living room. I told the RADs I'm going to that one, and went along. Sure enough, the guy starts telling me about how his house is haunted by his dead grandmother's spirit, and because he was going to sell the house, she had started haunting him. As a fan of early Supernatural, I did the whole Sam/Dean thing of walking around asking if he found any cold spots. Did the lights flicker? Did he use salt to protect himself? I wandered around his house for 5 minutes asking him these different questions whilst making notes. Of course, he says that the objects had stopped being thrown across the room when I arrived, and there were no signs of what he described. I believe ghosts could exist, but this was clearly not a ghostly encounter. He was drunk and seemed to completely believe what he was saying. I gave him contact details of a friend, telling him to call for my friend in the morning as he was the exorcist that the police used. I think my visit helped him. He was obviously lonely and in a bad place emotionally. At least I gave him someone to talk to and to listen to him. Story 21. Just finished up dealing with the drunk men harassing people on a public dock that has a nice restaurant nearby. This middle-aged couple has been watching nearby, and I think they're just enjoying seeing their tax dollars at work. They look pretty well off from the way they were dressed. The couple comes up to me after I'm done with the members of the malt liquor club, and I can tell they're not from the area. I think they're going to ask for directions or something, but I'm wrong. The couple directs my attention to what appears to be a very large sea lion that is floating in the surface of the water. It's about 100 yards offshore. The sea lion isn't moving, and the couple tells me they're concerned about it. I ask them why, and they tell me they think the sea lion needs help. I give a little laugh because I think they're messing with me, and they go from 0 to 60 in a flash. They ask me if I think it's funny that the sea lion could be in need of help. They ask me what I'm going to do. They demand I do something because that's what I'm there for, and they, quote, pay my salary. I ask them what they would like me to do. They tell me to go out there and help it. I point to my police car and tell them that's what I have to work with. They then go off on how lazy I am because I can't find a way to help the sea lion. Other people are walking by and get these amazed looks on their faces because of how animated and emotional this couple is getting. I want to tell them to move along, but I pull out my cell phone and call one of the local federal law enforcement agents I know that deals with fish, sea lions, and the protection of all aquatic things. I'm trying to be professional about this and not get a complaint from the couple. I explain to federal officer the situation and the concerns of the couple that brought it to my attention. He starts to laugh and asks me if I'm joking. I tell him I'm not, and he asks me what they want me to do. Do they want me to go out to the sea lion and offer assistance? I tell him yes, that is what they suggested. The federal officer still thinks I might be joking. I ask him if the sea lion were dead or dying, what would or could be done in the situation. He laughs and tells me nothing. It's the circle of life, and that I should tell whoever made such a stupid request to move along. I didn't have to, though, because the phone was on speaker. I get lovin' ocean critters or critters of any kind. Absolutely, I would feel terrible if I thought a sea lion or something else were distressed in the water. However, I also understand that a police officer with a car probably can't make it out there and help it. Because, you know what, let's just say the police officer swam out there heroically. What now? I don't think they train them on first aid for sea lions. Story 22. Not a cop, but I was working in a gas station subway in a small town. Our location was at the intersection of the highway through town and a rail line that went through the town. The side of the railroad that the store was on was the nicer part of town, with Hoboville being on the other side. The police would hang out around the store pretty much constantly. They even had a key so they could come in and use the bathroom at night. I showed up one morning to open the store. It's about 6 a.m. and there are 3 empty cop cars behind the store, all empty. I let myself in the back door. There are about 5 cops plus the owner of the gas station all staring out the window. The lights are still off and the gas station is closed. Once they notice me come in, they shush me and motion for me to come over. There are 2 hobos running back and forth from their truck parked on the far side of the parking lot. They're going to a small building by the railroad crossing, one of those C-shaped buildings with a roof overhead. Guard shack looking thing. Anyhow, from the highway/railroad it looks like a regular building. But the completely open back of this building faces the store. And these 2 geniuses are trying to build a drug lab in it, in full view of the store, with half of the town's police force watching. We must have sat there watching these guys build it for over an hour until a trucker showed up trying to get gas and the owner opened the station. After that, the cops all went out the back door, got in their cars, and arrested the 2 guys and towed their truck. Story 23. I think I made such a call once. Smelled smoke in my apartment one night, but in my kitchen everything was all right. Opened the door. I lived in a 6-story building, and it smelled even stronger. Ran around in the hallway and tried to figure out where it was coming from, but none of my neighbors were home. I feared that somewhere a small fire were building. So I called 122. Better safe than sorry, right? Police showed up 1.5 minutes later. About 2 minutes after my call, they were already discussing with a young lady on the ground floor how she managed to burn her veggies so bad that a guy living 4 floors up called the emergency line. Apparently, I just have a good nose and was talking a bit too much about house fires with my friends, since I was the only one who noticed. I don't know who felt more awkward, me or her. When I went back into my apartment to get my ID, I saw the whole street lit with emergency lights of the police and fire department, enough to illuminate my flat in a nice blue color. At least I feel protected now. Thank you guys for getting up at night for people like me. I don't think OP's even in the wrong here. If they truly believed a fire could be starting, like there was a strong smell of smoke and none of your neighbors were home, yeah, calling seems like the right thing to do, doesn't it? But hey, maybe I'm wrong too. Story 24. When I first started as a dispatcher, we got a call from this woman who was very upset. She explained she just flew across the country, and when she boarded a plane on the West Coast, she had a mole above her belly button. When she got off the plane, the mole was gone. So I asked her, what can we do to help? She said she wanted us to send an officer to the West Coast. She wants them to go over all of the archived footage from the cell phone towers and spy satellites and find out what happened to her mole. I was a fairly new dispatcher at the time and obviously was taken aback by this request. I calmly explained the city was outside of our jurisdiction and she would have to contact an agency out west to conduct the search. She was satisfied with my response, thanked me, and hung up. It turned out she's what we refer to as a frequent flyer and called all the time when she went off her meds. Story 25. Not a story from a cop, but about cops being called on me. During my last year of high school, my friends and I would volunteer at the local elementary school. After volunteering, we would usually go play basketball or video games. But one Wednesday in particular, I said I couldn't because I had to go home and get started on my mountain of classwork. My group of 4 to 5 friends were driving parallel to me, repeatedly asking if I was really going to, quote, female dog out on them. Following 5 minutes of back and forth insults, my friends parked the car a few feet ahead of me, all jumped out of the car and proceeded to pick me up by my arms and legs. With the trunk of the car open, they tossed me in and started driving down the hill again. What they didn't know was that another car had been driving down the hill at the same time and had seen the whole thing. They thought I'd been kidnapped, which was very logical to assume given being kidnapped. Unbeknownst to my friends, this heroic couple tailed our car and got the license plate number. When we reached the bottom of the hill, my friends/kidnappers let me out. I yelled at them, we laughed it off and walked to McDonald's. Looking out the McDonald's window a block away, we could see 2 cop cars driving around the area we had just left. At the time, we didn't think much of it. I went home later that night and was working on my homework when I heard a knock on the door. My mom opened the door and I heard her talk to someone and then call for me. There was a San Francisco detective at my front door, checking to make sure I had not actually been kidnapped. I profusely apologized for wasting his time. Probably the first time a kidnapping victim apologized to the people looking for them, and he made me promise to wear a seatbelt in the future. This happened 5 years ago, but till this day, my friends still call me Trunk Boy. Story 26. Not a cop. I work as a wildlife biologist at a very busy state park, so I interact with our rangers and local dispatch a lot. I've dealt with quite a few odd wildlife-related calls. One night at about 10 p.m., I got called out to assist one of the rangers with a wildlife issue. No info on what she needed help with. She just told me to bring the biggest animal carrier I could find. We sometimes have to deal with 300-plus pound sea lions, which is always super sketchy, so I had no idea what the hell I was about to get myself into. When my coworker and I get there, we find the ranger holding her baton, squaring off with a rather mad-looking Canadian goose. It obviously wasn't injured, so we didn't really want to catch it since the rehab facility wouldn't be too pleased with us delivering a mad, not injured goose. But if we left it where it would probably get run over. We stood around for a bit dodging goose bites before my buddy had the idea to just chase it off the beach into the dunes. So that's what we did. Just after we'd successfully rid the beach of the offending goose, the local game warden rolls up, looking for it. Apparently he'd been chasing this goose all over the county. It was clearly used to people, probably an escaped, quote, pet, and kept showing up in the middle of town. He'd captured it a few times and relocated it to a lake outside of town where it could be with its goose friends. But no, it would rather be with people, and it kept coming back. I left a note for the day shift to keep an eye out for it and called it a night. Thought that was it. I was wrong. When I got in the next afternoon, I found out the goose had come back. My coworkers decided enough was enough. They tackled it and shoved it into one of our large animal crates. They put it in a shed we used to keep rescued birds in and called the game warden to come deal with it. I was just walking into the office when the warden pulled up, so I offered to help him load the goose up into his truck. We joked about the previous night and how much of a pain in the butt this bird was. Got to the shed and opened the door. No goose. The crate and goose were gone. I called around to try and find out who took it, but no one seemed to know. Can't say the warden was too upset, but I still wonder what became of that goose. Really? There's no security footage or anything? I find that hard to believe. Also, you deal with sea lions? I know a couple from a few stories back that could really use your help, man. You should get over there. Story 27. Not a cop. Any 911 call placed by my husband, soon to be ex-husband. And it's not just the calls themselves, it's the number of them. He's one of those people who will call a dozen times trying to get a faster response, even though nothing has changed. The best one by far, at least for me, was him calling the cops to, quote, get these cops off my property. Yup, he called the police, wanting to say that I assaulted him. Domestic violence. He punched me so hard in the stomach that I threw up on him, and then he called the police on me for assaulting him with bodily fluids. Good times. By the time the police showed up for that call, he couldn't remember calling them. So he called the state police non-emergency line over and over, trying to get them to send someone to get the cops off the property, you know, the ones he called for. Then he tried calling the city police back and having the call canceled, but they were already on the property. He had alleged an assault, and he obviously wasn't mentally stable. So they couldn't clear the call until they had spoken to both of us, and he refused to even tell them his name. So they couldn't leave until they tested his competency. By the end of it, we had 2 state officers, 3 city officers, 2 medics, and a doctor that was on a ride along with them, all standing in my living room, unsure of how to proceed. Solution ended up being to remove him from the situation for a psych eval. Story 28. How about something I myself radioed in a dispatch? I used to work for my campus police department as a student assistant. On this particular day, I was working loss prevention, which is a fancy way of saying I had to drive around campus and lock up doors with just bags and bags full of keys and key rings. So I'm out locking a building. I come back to my car and, well, when your whole job is keeping track of keys, and the keys you need to get in your car are locked inside of the car, well, you know. So I was given a radio, but never fully trained on how to use it. Like I never had to memorize the police alphanumeric code and only knew the 3 or 4 codes I used on a regular basis. I also panicked and didn't think to ask the dispatcher to go to a private channel. So here I am, a college student, essentially telling the entire police department, William 22?
William 22, go ahead.
Can you send a PSO to location X and Y, hoping she wouldn't ask why?
For what purpose do you need a PSO?
I locked my keys in the car.
10-4, Baker 22.
Baker 22, go ahead.
Please report to X and Y.
You get the idea. In that brief moment of silence, I could hear the entire PD laughing and shaking their heads at the same time. When the officer came, he said, "When you work this beat, hit me up with my handle. Ask me to switch to a private line, and then just tell me." Which I did have to do one other time. Story 30. Not a cop, but my dad was, retired. One story really sticks out. He gets a call from dispatch letting him know there was a robbery at the local grocery store. No suspect description, but the victim was waiting for an officer by his car and gave the car description. He responds and starts talking to the guy. Apparently he had just been paid, and had about $2,000 cash in his trunk when he went into the store. He came back out and it was gone. My dad asked the guy to open the trunk so he could confirm it wasn't there and get the investigation going. The guy then got really antsy, not wanting to open his trunk. My dad let him know that he couldn't do much without confirming it was gone or stolen, so the guy asked for assurance. "So, you're just gonna be looking to see if the money's gone, nothing else, right?" "Yeah, I just need to make sure that it's actually gone and didn't slide around or get tucked under the carpet or something." After some conversation, the guy agrees to open his trunk just so he can confirm the money isn't there. He opens his trunk and there is brick after brick of coke. Largest bust this small rural town had seen. As my dad was arresting him, he was adamant that he couldn't because, "You're just making sure the money's gone. It's not there, see?" Which, while that was true, you can't just ignore a crap ton of coke as an officer. After getting the grocery store to turn over surveillance camera footage, turns out the guy had a few meetups in the parking lot selling his product, and one of these customers noticed the pile of cash in the trunk, so he grabbed the money and his coke and left. prompting the dealer to call the cops. I feel like as the dude, you just gotta, take the L on this one, right? Surely you have to know that that's going to happen. You cannot show an officer of the law a trunk full of an illegal substance. This is the same logic as you have to tell me if you're a cop. You can't lie. Story 31. A few years ago, I was outside shoveling snow with my toddler-aged son. He was mimicking me using a spatula as a shovel. All of a sudden, 2 cop cars pull up in front of the house, sirens blaring. Officer pops out of the lead car, hand on her weapon, stares at me for what was probably 2 seconds, but it felt like an hour. Then starts laughing hysterically. While this was happening, my boy, scared, had inched up behind me and was holding onto my pant leg, peeking around my thigh at the police cars. I put my hands up and asked, "What's the trouble?" or something similarly innocuous. The other officer pops out of his car, looks confusedly at the first cop, mutters something under his breath, gets back in his car, and leaves. The first cop waves to him as he passes, still giggling, then asks if I live in this particular house. I reply, "Yes," and she asks to see an ID to prove it. I pull out my license. She asks if the child is my son, and I once again say yes. She responds by rolling her eyes, giggling some more, and then telling me with a huge smile on her face why they had been called. Someone had reported a, quote, dangerous vagrant attempting to harm a small child with a snow shovel and possibly abducted the child in broad daylight. Now, at the time, I had a very long beard and was wearing a colorfully mismatched outfit, as it was a hungover Sunday morning and I was more concerned about being warm than how I looked. But I wouldn't have classified myself as appearing vagrant-esque. That particular officer and I now wave when we see each other. Story 32. My mom came home one day and heard a faint rustling upstairs. She figured the cat was playing with something and let it go. She got on the phone with a friend, chatted for a few minutes, and then starts hearing bang, bang, bang from upstairs. So she starts calling the cat, and lo and behold, he was on the first floor the whole time. Meanwhile, bang, bang, bang. So she says to the friend, "I think someone's in my house." The friend calls 911 while my mom runs outside in a panic. Outside, she sees a beat-up car slowing down as it goes past, then speeding up. "It's the getaway car," she realizes, but she can't see the plate. So the cops are there within minutes, as is her concerned friend who lived a couple of blocks away. The police go inside and search room to room, even bringing her back in to help them check in closets, etc. Some of the rooms do look pretty messy, like they've been tossed, but no burglars are found. So the cops take a report but aren't sure. My mother's friend wanders into the upstairs home office and notices 3 things. 1. There's paper all over the floor. 2. The fax machine is blinking. 3. There's no paper in the fax machine. Turns out someone sent a long fax while Mom was out. The rustling was paper running through the feeder. The bang, bang, bang was the fax machine out of paper and trying to still print. The beat-up car was lost and trying to read our mailbox number. The tossed rooms were just messy. My mom was pretty embarrassed. She called the 911 on a fax machine and lost tourists. Story 33. So this is a story about me making a stupid call to the police. One night in the 1980s, my wife and I were laying in bed reading. We see a light flashing outside and decide to investigate. We peek out the front window and see the porch light across the street flashing on and off in 3 flash bursts. We have no idea what's going on, so we call 911. We think maybe the elderly couple is in trouble. We imagine they're being held hostage and the only thing they can do is flash the light for help. Terrified, we crouch on the sofa and wait. The cops arrive. I step onto my front porch and watch as they rap on the neighbor's door. By now, the flashing had stopped, and my wife and I had conjured up all sorts of horrible things that might have happened. The old guy answers the door. I hear the muffled sounds of an officer telling him why he is there. Suddenly, the hard-of-hearing neighbor says, "It was a skunk! I was trying to scare it off with the light." I suddenly feel about 1 inch tall. The 2 cops are desperately trying to hold back what I can only assume are gales of laughter. The cop comes to me on my porch and I'm apologizing over and over. He says, "No, don't apologize. We appreciate when neighbors take care of each other like that. We are happy to come out." I shrunk back into my house and avoided eye contact with that neighbor for about a week. Story 34. I feel sorry for the cop that was sent to my house. I moved away to Southern California for college and stayed with my grandmother. My grandfather was a pilot and did well for himself and had luck in the markets, so they lived pretty well. He died years prior, and when my grandmother heard I was accepted to a school nearby, she was elated, telling me to live with her instead of a dorm. About once a month I drove to my parents' house, some 400 miles away, to visit them and old friends. Because of traffic, I always drive late at night, and this evening I rolled in at 1 a.m. So I'm unpacking my car, which is a POS 1996 Altima. My immediate family is not as well off, and moving my belongings up into my room. I was hungry and I went downstairs and made myself a frozen pizza. Watched some TV waiting for it to be done, and there's a knock at the door. It's now 2 a.m. and I get worried. I've known her neighbors since birth. I have many family videos of myself at around 2 years old, and all her neighbors holding me and playing with me. So I assume maybe one of them had passed, since we're all so close-knit. I opened the door and an officer was standing there. He told me a neighbor had reported a party at my house with underaged people. I kindly invited him in and let him tour the place. After a thorough investigation, he concluded it was a bunk call. He apologized and started to head out. I asked him why he was sent, and he said our neighbors across from us saw a car that didn't belong arrive very late and unload bags of stuff they assumed was alcohol and such. Moral of my story, don't drive a crappy car in a nice neighborhood or you might waste an officer's time. Story 35. Now, you could argue this is either the dumbest call or easiest arrest. I was working night in my local town. I had to take a statement off of one of the door staff of a nightclub there. He'd been assaulted earlier that night by a member of the public high on coke. While taking this statement, another doorman came up to me and said that an MOP had just approached him who seemed off his face on what he thinks is drugs. I'm thinking, sure, this is town late on a Friday night. People are gonna be wasted. I don't have the grounds to search this guy. The doorman then tells me he had white powder on his nose and all down his shirt. I mean, some people might enjoy a sherbet fountain. I'm not sure if you Yanks get those sweets on a night. Well, I head outside to see if I could find the guy. Lo and behold, this guy's stumbling down the street. I quickly catch up to him and find the door staff wasn't lying. This guy had white powder all on his nose and his shirt. He even has a little white powder stash. I tell him I'm detaining him for a search, and the grounds, the object of my search, the powers I'm using, all that jazz. He's happy with all this, as he is completely out of his mind and doesn't care. I ask him, has he taken anything, and he tells me, yeah. I ask him if he has anything on him, and he says no. Find nothing until I get to his wallet, where I find some used wraps of white powder and a small half-used wrap. He gets nicked. I get my first arrest, he gets a caution and some drugs off the street. Win for all. Unfortunately, I find from then on, they aren't all that easy. Story 36. When I was about 14, I was longboarding with my brother around our subdivision at around 11 at night. I ended up crashing and breaking my wrist, and I had asphalt all through my hands and blood everywhere. So I go to the first house I see with the lights on and knock on the door, hoping I could just wash out my hands so no infections would occur. No one answers. So I go to the next house and the girl lets me in, and I wash up and start to head home. A cop pulls up and flashes his lights at me. Me and my brother stop. He gets out and asks us what we're doing, and he looks at the skateboard and bike, and we say we were skating, and I wiped out and I showed him my hands. He said, ouch, that sucks, man. But we got a call about suspicious behavior, and me and my brother look at each other kinda confused. At about that time, a truck pulls in the entrance to the subdivision, flying, going about 60 miles an hour. He comes to a stop next to the cop car. A man gets out and walks right up to me and gets within 5 inches of my face. He yells at me about scaring his wife and stuff. At that point, I'm confused and I'm almost in tears. The cop grabs the dude and says, "You better calm down and walk back to your truck." The dude is furious, yelling at the cop now about how we were banging on the door and scaring his wife. So flashback to the first house I knocked on. I guess we scared the woman and she called her husband at work and the cops. It's about 12 at night now. The cops end up searching the dude's home, and at about that time, my dad pulls up. He gets out of the car screaming at us, asking, what the hell did we do wrong? And that's when I break down, because my dad doesn't even ask what happened. He just starts screaming at us and demanding to know what we did. The cop calms down my dad while I'm on the ground crying with a broken arm still bleeding. At this point, I've lost so much blood, I start to get dizzy. The dude yelling at us got my heart pumping so fast. The cop looks at my dad and says, "We did nothing wrong." And my dad looks at the cop and finally asks what happened. He tells him the story. My dad finally looks at us and says, "I'm glad you're not hurt." That's about the time I fall over on the ground and pass out. I wake up back at my house with my arm bandaged and some ice cream next to me. I got to the hospital the next day and get a cast that I wear for 6 weeks. Never heard from the dude or his wife again, but I guess the cop went over there and had a talk with them, so that satisfied me. Story 37. I'm not an officer, but I work retail at Ross Dress for Less, a discount store that sells mostly clothes, shoes, and accessories, as well as home goods. We have a specific return policy that states if you don't have your receipt, you can still return the item, but you get store credit, and only the amount that is the current markdown price. Usually it only goes down $1 or a few within a couple of months, but if it's been a long while, the price it's marked down to could be as low as 49 cents. One day, this guy comes in to return a single pair of boys' jeans because they didn't fit his son. I look up the price on the computer and it's listed as, well, 49 cents. He doesn't like it, and we go back and forth. I show him the back of the receipt stating our return policy and the separate placard that states the exact same thing. Eventually, he states that we're swindling him and are breaking the law, then calls the cops. Naturally, he refuses to step aside while he waits to let me help anyone else, and the line backs up. Even with additional cashiers, it was a Saturday during peak hours. About 15 minutes go by and the cop, clearly annoyed and already not taking the situation seriously, comes up and asks the guy if he was the one who placed the call. He says yes, and the cop turns to me and asks what happened. So I go through the whole rigmarole of our return policy and process, then what went down with the customer. The cop asks to see the placard and I hand it to him. He spends all of 3 seconds looking at it before he places it in front of the customer and says, "He's following the return policy. That's how it is." The customer, suddenly sweet as pie, says, "Okay, he'll take the store credit," and he profusely thanks the officer for his time. Cop doesn't say anything to the guy but wishes me a better day, then leaves. Later, the customer waited patiently in line, and when I got him again, he acted like I was his best friend. I don't know if I respect this more or less than doubling down. Because, doubling down, that's being confidently wrong, which is pretty bad. But this is acting it never happened? Or maybe they just thought they weren't even really being that mean to OP? They didn't realize? In which case, I guess it makes a bit of sense, but weird. Story 38. Not a police officer, but I was on the receiving end of a pretty dumb police encounter. A couple important details. My wife is allergic to pot. It's to a point where she'll start sneezing up a storm before I can even smell it. And by the time I can smell it, her throat starts closing up. This was in Colorado shortly before it was legalized. A few years back, my then girlfriend, now wife, and I were leaving a pool hall and headed home. While waiting at a red light shortly after leaving, I realized I hadn't turned my headlights on, because the road was well lit and, well, I'm an idiot. I turned the lights on and as fortune would have it was the exact moment a cop went through the intersection in front of us. So they got a sudden blast of light right in their peripheral. They immediately turn on their lights and cut through a gas station parking lot at the corner to circle around behind us. They pulled us over the moment the light went green. For the most part, it was a pretty standard interaction, asking if I'd been drinking, looking over my license and such. It's not looking good, and I'm pretty sure based on his demeanor that he's looking for any excuse he can to ticket me, when a second cruiser stops behind them, and its driver comes up to the passenger side and knocks on the window. My wife rolls down the window and starts talking to him, and seconds later, starts sneezing like mad. The cop on my side asks if she's okay, so I reply someone nearby must be smoking pot because she's allergic to it. The two exchange a glance over the top of my car, and Cop 1 immediately hands back my license, tells us to drive safe, and they both half walk, half jog back to their cars and leave. I am 90% sure we caught them smoking on duty. Allergic to pot, huh? I've never heard of it before, but I guess, yeah, why wouldn't it be possible? At the very least, the chances can't be too high, right? Story 39. We've been informed by our supervisor that there's been some kind of happening requiring police's attention near our current location. We asked for more details, but supervisor responded that explanations weren't clear, so we should be ready to update him and call for reinforcements or emergency services at any moment. We finally got to a little church. It was crowded with people in their formal dresses, looked like a wedding. We went in and asked some random people who called us. They didn't know, but they told us to go to the bride's home because the family lives here and they usually know stuff about what's going on in the area. Okay, so we went to the bride's family's house. Shaken woman greets us at the door and she led us on the floor. She refused to explain what happened until she showed us the door of one of the rooms. Turned out the bride panicked, closed herself in the bedroom and refused to go to the wedding. Her bridesmaid, mother, and some aunts didn't know what they should do to avoid the scandal. So they called the police, lied, and then asked us to force the doors. We imposed a fine and left, but we kind of stuck around to watch the drama. Story 40. I'm not a cop, but hey, probably worthy of how close it came to being a police issue. Way back in the days of dial-up, I made a startling discovery that would change my life forever. That discovery was breasts. They were everywhere and all available for free on the internet. The problem is, having a 28.8 kilobit per second modem, images containing them took a very long time to load. And when the only computer located at home was my dad's finance and work machine in the lounge room, and alt-tabbing took several seconds, you had to be exceedingly careful about not getting caught. Thank God for creaky staircases. Well, I had already learned from a previous punishment to clear my search history after looking stuff up. But unfortunately, my dad eventually grew suspicious, as all parents do, of my silence when downstairs, and the sudden lack of color ink in the printer. Industrious as I was, I printed every image I found particularly interesting for later perusal. One day he puts his plan into action and climbed down the stairs whilst avoiding the creaky ones. Now being 12, I wasn't interested in women twice my age, and had made the mistake of typing in a dangerous search term. Anyone familiar with Google's sorting algorithm will be familiar with the fact it won't show you illegal material. But my dad wasn't. To his mind, he'd just turned the corner and busted me looking up illegal content using a computer registered in his name, with an internet connection in his name, and subsequently using his printer to print copies of the same. Oh, he was furious. He literally dragged me into his car yelling the whole way and drove me to the nearest police station. I begged. I pleaded. I bawled my eyes out to ask him to not turn me in and have me arrested as a 12-year-old internet predator, but he wasn't having any of it. Finally, we pulled into the car park next to the main entrance of the cop shop, and he turned to me and told me to swear on my continued liberty that I would never use the phrase teen in a search bar ever again, and that I was banned from using the computer for a month. Naturally, I agreed, until about 6 weeks later, when some mates of mine from school discovered adult content and proceeded to share their trove of legal content with the rest of the guys in class. I subsequently realized my dad didn't have the slightest clue about internet adult content, and that he was, in no uncertain terms, full of crap. Still, nothing gonna scare kids straight faster than throwing them to the mercy of the police. Story 41. Not a cop, but watched this go down about a year ago. I don't have too many law enforcement interactions, thankfully, so this one brandished my favorite line from an LEO. Backstory. Duplex across the street, a shared mailbox post in the middle, and the two driveways are on opposite sides of the property. Both groups of residents of the duplex are kinda sketch, so there's always cars on the road. More often than not, there's a car or cars either entirely blocking the mailboxes, or at least parked to be a major inconvenience to access the mail post. Our mail person is awesome. You all are. You folks put up with so much crap from people, and goes out of her way most of the time to deliver mail if she can. But sometimes it's physically impossible for her to access the mailboxes. The night. I'm listening to a new, to me, Explosions in the Sky album I got recently. I was grading papers or messing with an aquarium. I start to hear a faint conversation. While not always completely instrumental, EITS rarely has many vocals, and I hadn't remembered any from the first listen, so I got attentive. Then I realized the conversation was outside, and it's accompanied by two squad cars. Sneaking a peek through the curtains, yeah, so what? I watched the following go down. So what's going on exactly?
They keep blocking the mailbox, and I can't get my mail.
Note there are currently no cars blocking the mailbox, and the LEOs quickly noticed this. Who's doing what?
I can't get my mail because they've always got cars blocking the mailbox.
They're blocking the mailbox. Who?
My neighbors. They've always got people over, and they're always parking in front of my mailbox, and I can't get my mail because of it.
So you called the cops?
Yeah.
That's not really a police matter. That's more of a neighbor matter. You should talk to your neighbor.
I have. She tried to run me over with her car last time I yelled at her.
She tried to run you over?
Yeah.
Well, that's vehicle assault, so that's something we can do something about. Would you like to make a statement?
Will I have to go to court and crap to deal with this?
Yes, you eventually will. Since we didn't see anything, you'll have to be the one to explain what happened to a judge.
I don't have time for that crap. Who has time for that crap? Can't you just write her a ticket?
If you'd like us to charge her with vehicular assault, you'll have to explain that. What would you like us to write a ticket for if you aren't willing to go in and explain this to a judge?
Hell, I don't know. She's just being rude as hell.
I see. We're the police. We don't exactly do rude. Now, if you'd like to write a report for vehicular assault, that's something we can do. I can't write her a ticket for being rude. That's something you just have to deal with on your own. Now, if there's nothing else you'd like us to do, we're going to have to be on our way. They yell a couple of expletives at the cops, turn around and slam the door as they go back inside. Story 42. My SO and I were coming back from taking the dog for a walk, and as we start to approach our brick house, I notice a black thing above our door. It kinda looked like a cable. I asked him if that had always been there, and neither of us could remember. As we got closer, we finally realized it was a snake crawling up the brick of the house, following the pattern of spaces between the bricks. We really didn't know what to do, as there isn't an animal control where we live, and we just so happened to live across the street from the police department. I walked across the street and used the intercom by the door to explain the situation. They keep their door locked at all times, so people have to be buzzed in. About 10 minutes later, 2 cops show up. One immediately leaves. Apparently he doesn't apprehend snakes. Another duo walk up but aren't sure what to do. They eventually take my garden hoe and stand on a chair under the door. Due to the porch steps, there was no way to approach it from an angle, and just kinda toss the garden hoe at it. No dice. So the city inspector shows up, and even though he's quite a bit taller than the other guys, they still can't get the snake down. Finally, someone goes to borrow a can of wasp spray and uses that to get it down. Things did not end well for that snake. I have another instance where I actually called 911 for what ended up being a stupid reason. I had left my living room windows open for a breeze, and we woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of music in our house. It was sudden and very loud. I immediately call 911 while my husband walks through the house with a baseball bat. Once we get into the living room and I'm on the phone with the dispatch, we realize the music is coming from the sheriff's station. That's a diagonal from our house. A group of guys, mostly cops, were outside blaring music and made me think I had a creepy horror movie vibe murderer in my house. I explained the mistake, but the music stopped very soon afterward. Story 43. Not a cop, but I had the cops called on me for a dumb reason, and his response was hilarious. I had just gotten a new pellet gun, a really low-powered thing, to shoot plastic pellets at the raccoon that kept trying to break into our kitchen. Wouldn't have ended it, just stung real bad and hopefully discouraged him. Anyway, I was adjusting the sights and using a can in the backyard as target practice. My yard at the time backed up to a heavily wooded area with nothing beyond for a good mile, so the odds of hitting anyone with this little plastic pellet, basically zero. After I'm done, 2 cop cars come speeding up to my house, lights and sirens going off. One cop jumps out saying they got a report that someone was shooting a high-power hunting rifle at the neighbor's house. After showing the officer the rifle and explaining it was the closest thing to a firearm in the house, the cop laughed and said, "Wow, okay, your neighbors are idiots. I'll go tell them not to waste our time with this stuff anymore." Then went and had a long, awkward talk with the neighbor about filing false reports. I wonder what OP's neighbors heard to make them think it was a hunting rifle. 'Cause, I mean, I'm no gun buff, but that seems like it would be a little louder than a pellet gun, if I had to guess. A bit of an overreaction. Anyway, that's the last story we have for today. I would like to thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.